I was at a party with my husband, when a woman suddenly approached us and placed her hand around his arm. But Alexandre jerked his arm away and pushed her face back without hesitation, his face clouded with cold rage. How shameless can she be? My wife is right here. The crowd was starting to stir, though no one had spoken. I looked between the three of them, and the air became thick with expectation, as if they were watching a great spectacle unfold before their eyes. "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. I mistook you for my boyfriend. Your backs are so alike, and I didn't notice in time." She leaned forward slightly, showing a deep neckline, her expression mischievous, as if everything were an innocent mistake. Turning to me, she added, "Ma'am, you don't mind, do you? After all, I'm Mr. Martin's secretary, and there's absolutely nothing between us." Her eyes met mine, with no trace of regret. If there was anything, it was the glimmer of provocation behind her words. A wave of irritation surged within me, about to explode. But before I could speak, Alexandre intervened with a sharp, cunning voice. "That's enough, Sarah Mendes. It doesn't matter the reason. I'll let it slide today, but there won't be a next time." As he turned to leave, something caught the corner of my eye. A gleam reflected off the necklace she wore, shining for just a moment, but enough for me to look closer. And in that instant, a familiar recognition washed over me. Mr. Martin really is something, isn't he? So calm and serene, dealing with everything without making a scene, murmured someone in the crowd. "Yes, Mrs. Martin is very lucky," another added. Mr. Martin himself intervened and ended the flirtation before it could cause real trouble. As the others realized it was all a misunderstanding, their expressions softened, although their curiosity barely diminished. Normally, I would have smiled politely, but not this time. I didn't care about their compliments or empty words. My mind was entirely focused on what I had just seen. Without looking at anyone else, I turned to Alexandre with a cold expression. "That necklace isn't the same one you gave me last time. The one I told you I didn't like because the design wasn't my style." I spent the entire night in a bad mood, unable to shake the bitterness that gnawed at my heart. Though Alexandre tried to explain himself, claiming the gift to Sarah was part of the company's employee benefits, I refused to forgive him so easily. "Then you shouldn't give something so personal." Giving a necklace was an intimate, very private gesture, not something to be considered just a work benefit. "Nora, dear, please, don't be upset. I wasn't thinking clearly, you know? I'm a man, sometimes I can be insensitive, but I swear it meant nothing. It won't happen again." His apology sounded sincere and full of regret. However, his words didn't ease the tight knot in my chest. I couldn't shake the unease, and I had trouble sleeping that night. The next morning, I woke up to a repugnant sight. Sarah and Alexandre sitting together on the couch. They weren't too close, just looking at each other. Yet something in the scene bothered me, deeply irritated me. Alexandre noticed me coming downstairs and stood up with a gentle smile on his face. "Nora, you're already awake? Come on, come downstairs. I know you were upset yesterday, so I asked Sarah to come early this morning to apologize in person." I shot Sarah a cold, indifferent glance. Her expression hadn't changed since the night before. There was no guilt or remorse. If anything, her eyes still held that same subtle glint of provocation. I slowly descended, taking my time as I approached them. I sat beside Alexandre, grabbed the coffee from the table, and took a sip before finally speaking, my tone as calm as the surface of serene water. "It's just a necklace. I don't want it. After all, there's no need to make a scene over something so trivial. If Miss Mendes likes it, she can keep it. Aren't you kind? You're so generous, ma'am. But that necklace wasn't a gift. It's a reward from Mr. Martin. Even if you don't want it, it's very valuable to me. I asked you to apologize. Why do you talk so much to my wife?" Alexandre's face darkened, slightly irritated, a flicker of annoyance crossing his gaze. "I deeply apologize, Mrs. Martin. I understand better now. I'll be more careful in the future," she said, but her words dripped with insolence. It didn't sound like an apology, in fact. It felt more like someone displaying their power. "All right, you've apologized. You can go now." Alexandre spoke again before I had the chance. The first time, I let it slide, but now his insistence on interrupting me made me wonder if my husband was really protecting her, tolerating her insolence. Maybe he was afraid I would confront her. I remained silent, my eyes following Sarah as she left. No words left my lips. Once we were alone, Alexandre took my hand and pulled me into his arms. His voice soft, yet firm. "Nora, dear, please, calm down. I promise, this was the last time. There won't be another mistake. I won't do this again." I could feel the steady rhythm of his heart as I rested against his chest. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't calm the storm inside me. A woman's intuition is a powerful thing, and mine screamed that something was wrong. My heart told me that things were far from as simple as he wanted me to believe. And indeed, a woman's intuition is terrifying. After that day, I secretly hired a professional paparazzi to follow Alexandre, track his movements, and see what he was really up to. In just a few days, I had my answer. I received a stack of photos, each one more incriminating than the last. The photos showed them together repeatedly, going to a hotel together. It could be interpreted as a social event, even a business trip, but kissing in the car. What was that? Personal service? Although I desperately wanted to make excuses for Alexandre, convincing myself that there must have been some misunderstanding, all my defenses crumbled the moment I saw the picture of him kissing her. My heart was quickly overtaken by a sadness I could no longer suppress. The paparazzi didn't stop at just the photos. They went further, uncovering more about the relationship between Alexandre Martins and Sarah Mendes. To my surprise, I discovered they had a history that went back to high school. For 3 years, they were inseparable, a young couple deeply in love. Their love story had a tragic ending. In their last year, Alexandre's mother disapproved of Sarah's modest family background, so she decided that Sarah Mendes was not good enough for her son. She separated them, leaving Sarah devastated. She left the city in search of a new life, lived in another city for years, until recently, when she couldn't find stable employment. That's when she approached Alexandre. Instead of helping her find a decent job elsewhere, he brought her on as his personal secretary. Reading this information, an even deeper sadness consumed me. Alexandre had never mentioned that he had a first love. If all she wanted was a job, he could have easily found a position for her at another company, far away from us. But no, my husband brought her close, into our lives, which seemed like a clear sign that his connection with her hadn't faded. I couldn't help but let the memories flood my mind, back to the day of our wedding, when Alexandre Martins kneeled, his eyes shining with emotion as he slid the ring onto my finger. His voice trembled as he vowed that I was the only woman he would love for the rest of his life. Yet here we were, and the man I trusted the most. I never imagined myself in this situation, looking at photos that proved the betrayal of the man I vowed to love and trust forever. When I saw Alexandre and Sarah together, laughing, embracing, and finally kissing in a public place as if it were something natural, my whole world collapsed. The man who once promised I was his only woman now seemed to be laughing in my face with every captured image. But I wouldn't let it slide. For days, I thought about confronting him. I wanted to know how he dared to play with my feelings and how he had the audacity to bring Sarah so close to me, as if I were blind or foolish. It was an insult. But I wanted more than just a confrontation. I wanted to see Alexandre and Sarah pay for every second of pain they caused me. So, I started planning, observing every move of Alexandre and documenting everything. After all, who knew when this could come in handy? That night, he came home acting as if nothing had happened. He tried to hug me, but I pulled away, saying I was tired. That was enough to arouse his suspicion. I could feel the weight of his gaze on my back as I silently climbed the stairs. He knew something was wrong, but still believed I was the naive wife who had never discovered his escapades. The days turned into weeks, and I kept a cold, distant facade, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, I investigated every corner of Sarah's life. I discovered where she lived, who her family was, and even the financial problems that forced her to seek out Alexandre. I realized that Sarah was a calculating woman, but not intelligent. She surrounded herself with small lies and favors, believing no one would ever notice. But I did, and every detail I uncovered brought me closer to my goal. Then, one day I decided to act. It was Alexandre's birthday, and of course, he planned a party. He always loved being the center of attention, surrounded by friends and colleagues, everyone thinking he was the perfect husband. I played the role of the exemplary wife, neat and smiling, pretending everything was perfect. I made sure to arrive before Sarah and watched. When she walked in, I felt a bitter taste seeing her. She smiled at him as if I wasn't there, as if all of this was some private joke between them. During the party, I approached Sarah while Alexandre was distracted. "I wanted to thank you for the necklace you value so much. I think it suits you well, don't you think?" I said with a sweet smile, but a tone that made it clear it was an attack. She hesitated, staring at me with a slight glint of challenge in her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Martins, it's a very beautiful piece. I thank Mr. Martins every day for such generosity," she replied without hesitation. At that moment, I was sure she was deeply involved in the game. When Alexandre decided to go further, I stepped away and walked over to a group of mutual friends. I began to tell stories about how Alexandre and I were in love, and how he always said I was the love of his life. I made sure to narrate episodes where he promised me fidelity, mentioning the vows and promises he made on our wedding day. I saw Sarah listening from a distance, her face growing increasingly tense. Finally, the party reached its peak, and I decided it was time for the surprise. I walked up to the stage with a wide smile and asked for everyone's attention. I wanted to take this special moment to give a tribute to my dear husband. I grabbed the microphone and began talking about all our moments together, but subtly included details that only he and I knew. Details that alluded to our trust, our love. Alexandre started sweating, realizing what I knew. Then I showed a few of the photos I had saved, just one or two, but enough for him to understand the gravity of the situation. This, of course, is just a small memento of our unique moments. The silence in the room was overwhelming. Alexandre tried to smile but couldn't. He knew I knew, and the expression of panic on Sarah's face only confirmed to me that they both understood the message. After the party, he came to me, furious. "What was that? Nora, do you want to destroy everything?" I looked at him coldly. "Destroy? I thought you were already doing a fine job of that." I had no intention of backing down. "Do you think I'm foolish, Alexandre, that I don't know what you and Sarah have been up to?" He fell silent, with no convincing excuse. "She needed help, Nora, that's all." My voice was venomous. "Is that what you call help? Kissing her in public, spending nights with her?" He tried to justify himself, saying I was exaggerating, that it was just a mistake and it would never happen again, but I had heard enough excuses. In the following days, while Alexandre tried to make up for the damage with empty gestures and meaningless words, I remained silent, observing and planning. I knew he and Sarah were meeting in secret, though they tried to be more discreet. Now, I wanted him to believe everything was fine, that the party scandal had been my final revenge. And then, when he least expected it, I would make my final move. In truth, I already had an ace up my sleeve. I contacted the lawyer and began preparing the divorce documentation. But that would be just the beginning. With the evidence I had, I could ensure that Alexandre not only lost everything but was also seen as the traitor he was. It wasn't the end yet, but it was close, and I could already savor the victory that was coming. After all, Alexandre chose to play with my feelings, thinking I was weak, but little did he know that I was ready to destroy the world he had so carefully built. Months passed since that party, while Alexandre and Sarah continued to believe I was more restrained, planning a discreet divorce. I was more determined than ever to destroy everything he had built. Finally, the day arrived. Everything was ready for the final blow. Before anything else, I made sure to reinforce with my lawyer that I wanted every detail of the case prepared for the court. I wanted everything to be perfectly legitimate, leaving no way out for Alexandre. The morning the divorce papers arrived on his desk at the office, he called me. His voice sounded different, anxious. He wanted to meet, pleading for a personal conversation. I agreed, and we arranged to meet that same night at our house. Sarah would be at the office, as she had promised to work late. I confess that, for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia when I saw Alexandre at the end of the day, sitting in our living room, where so many times we had believed we were a family. But that memory disappeared the instant he opened his mouth. "Nora," he began, "I know I made mistakes, but this is extreme. Do you really want to end everything this way? Do you think we can't resolve this another way?" "Resolve?" I asked, my voice low and cold. "Alexandre, you resolved this the moment you started playing with my feelings and bringing Sarah into our life as if I were just an obstacle in your way." He tried to get closer, as if he could still convince me with his remorseful expression, but it was too late. "It was a mistake. I was lost. Sarah means nothing. I was just trying to help someone who used to be important, but that doesn't mean I don't love you," he said, in a low and almost trembling voice. I almost laughed. The same pathetic speech he always used, as if he had convinced me. But now I knew the whole truth, the whole past he had hidden. "Alexandre, I don't want to hear your excuses anymore. This divorce is happening, and you will face the consequences of everything you've done. We're going to court, and I want everyone to know who Alexandre Martins really is." He tried to stay calm, but I saw his face twist. He knew I wasn't playing. He started arguing about the assets, the money, the businesses we had built together. He even tried to say I was only after his wealth. But again, I was way ahead of him. I had made sure everything was safely in my name so he couldn't touch a penny. "I thought you were more fair," he said, in a bitter tone. "This isn't justice, it's revenge. Call it whatever you want, Alexandre." I replied, without any remorse. "I call it consequence." The hearing was scheduled for a few weeks later. During this time, I was careful with every detail, reviewing the evidence and every piece of information I would present in court. I wanted there to be no gap for him to escape. When the big day arrived, Alexandre was visibly shaken. His arrogant expression had wilted, as if he had finally understood what was about to happen. In court, I presented all the evidence calmly, recounting every moment when he and Sarah had crossed the line. I made sure to emphasize the emotional toll it had caused, while Alexandre's lawyers worked hard to portray everything as a misunderstanding or a professional relationship. However, every testimony, every photo, every document I had carefully prepared made his excuses even more pathetic. When the judge handed down the decision, awarding almost all the assets to me and stipulating a compensation for emotional damages and betrayal, I felt a deep satisfaction. Alexandre had nothing left. He was reduced to a shadow of the man who once thought he was untouchable. And it wasn't just the money he had lost. It was his reputation, his public image, which he had cherished so much. As I left the courthouse, he tried to approach me one last time, with a look of desperation I had never seen before. "Nora, please, I made mistakes, but we can find a way to," he started. I cut off his words with a cold smile. "Alexandre, you're the one who chose this path. I'm just finishing what you started." I turned and walked away, without looking back, without leaving room for any doubt. I had planned my exit perfectly, and there he was, watching the only person who ever cared about him leave forever. Since that day, I never heard from him again, nor did I care to find out any news. It didn't matter what he did. Now he was destroyed, and my life was finally free. After the divorce, I focused on myself. I managed to grow in business and dedicated myself to a peaceful life, far from betrayal and lies. Today, I can say that the past is no longer a shadow in my life, but a reminder that I will never again let anyone play with my feelings. The revenge was complete, and with it, the peace I had long sought blossomed.